Hey, good morning, everyone. It is good to be with you today. It is June the 18th, and we're in Second Kings chapter 11. And just got a recap of where we're at. I think I explained this fact of the way that the king goes is the way the people go. And we see with both Israel and Judah that many times the kings were pursuing pagan gods, going after the worship of Baal and Ashtoreth, and when they did, the people would follow suit, and God saw it as a great sin. And in fact, like if you looked at the last verse of what we read yesterday, it says, "Nevertheless, the Lord said to Jehu, you have done well in following my instructions to destroy the family of Ahab. Therefore, your descendants will be kings of Israel down to the fourth generation." But Jehu did not obey the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart, and he refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam had led Israel to commit. And so God really rewards Jehu for what he had done in killing Ahab, which was really kind of, if you look at it, like the source of much of Israel's sin in the moment. But the problem is Jehu also is that there's a big but there, right? In verse 31, but Jehu did not obey the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart, and he refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam had led Israel to commit. And so, in other words, he killed he killed King Ahab, but he himself did not stop worshiping these pagan gods, and it was evil in the sight of God. And so there's this duplicity. And here's the thing: we live in a time when it's kind of it's an okay thing. It's looked at by people an okay thing to live with duplicity. Yeah, you know what? I serve God, but I do this. I serve God, but I am involved in this kind of sin. And it's going to be okay because it balances itself. That's not the way that God looks at it. It's not a balancing thing of like I sin over here, but I do this for God, and so that kind of evens the scale. That's not the way that God works. It is this stench of sin is really it's gross to God. It's and one could say an abomination, but it is. God sees that kind of duplicity as really something that turns his stomach. Okay, you look in Revelation where God says to the people, you're neither hot nor cold, so I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. That's that lukewarmness. You're not on fire for me, and yeah, you're not out there. You're not a devil worshiper, but you're right there in this middle, and that middle ground is not the ground that God wants. God wants us to be all in, right? All in. All right, so let's jump in. 2 Kings 11. When Athaliah, the mother of King Ahaziah of Judah, learned that her son was dead, she began to destroy the rest of the royal family. But Ahaziah's sister, Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Jehoram, took Ahaziah's infant son, Joash, and stole him away from among the rest of the king's children, who were about to be killed. She put Joash and his nurse in a bedroom to hide him from Athaliah, so the child was not murdered. Joash remained hidden in the temple of the Lord for 6 years, while Athaliah ruled over the land. I jump to 2 Chronicles 22:10. When Athaliah, the mother of King Ahaziah of Judah, learned that her son was dead, she began to destroy the rest of Judah's royal family. But Ahaziah's sister, Jehoshaphat, daughter of King Jehoram, took Ahaziah's infant son Joash and stole him away from among the rest of the king's children who were about to be killed. She put Joash and his nurse in a bedroom. In this way, Jehoshaphat, wife of Jehoiada the priest and sister of Ahaziah, hid the child so that Athaliah could not murder him. Joash remained hidden in the temple of God for 6 years while Athaliah ruled over the land. Back to 2 Kings 11:4. In the 7th year of Athaliah's reign, Jehoiada, the priest, summoned the commanders, the Kerite mercenaries, and the palace guards to come to the temple of the Lord. He made a solemn pact with them and made them swear on oath of loyalty there in the Lord's temple. Then he showed them the king's son. Jehoiada told them, "This is what you must do. A third of you who are on duty on the Sabbath are to guard the royal palace itself. Another third of you are to stand guard at the Sur Gate, and the final third must stand guard behind the palace guard. These 3 groups will all guard the palace. The other 2 units who are off duty on the Sabbath must stand guard for the king at the Lord's temple. Form a bodyguard around the king and keep your weapons in hand. Kill anyone who tries to break through. Stay with the king wherever he goes." So the commanders did everything as Jehoiada the priest ordered. The commanders took charge of the men reporting for the duty that Sabbath, as well as those who were going off duty. They brought them all to Jehoiada the priest, and he supplied them with spears and small shields that had once belonged to King David and were stored in the temple of the Lord. The palace guards stationed themselves around the king with their weapons ready. They formed a line from the south side of the temple around to the north side and all around the altar. Then Jehoiada brought out Joash, the king's son, placed the crown on his head, and presented him with a copy of God's laws. They anointed him and proclaimed him king, and everyone clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king." 2 Chronicles 23. In the 7th year of Athaliah's reign, Jehoiada the priest decided to act. He summoned his courage. I want you to notice that. You should underline that. He summoned his courage, because it takes courage and conviction. Okay? It takes courage and conviction. Those are 2 words that God is weighing heavily on my heart these days, for myself, very much for myself, for the church that I get the great privilege of helping to lead, and I believe that other believers. It's a time and it's a day that you have to have conviction, the conviction of God, that He must be my Lord. This I must do, fulfill the Great Commission. Great conviction. Nothing is done without conviction inside a person's heart. Conviction and courage. That we are to be disciples who are courageous. It's that thing that God continues to say, be strong and courageous, right? Be strong and courageous. It repeats it 3 times to Joshua, and then repeats it a number of other times. It's a theme. And I believe it's a theme for us. Be strong and courageous, right? And so it took courage for Jehoiada the priest in this moment. His life was on the line. He was giving it all. It was all chips in the middle. Okay? He says, he summoned his courage and made a pact with 5 commanders. Azariah, son of Jeroham, Ishmael, the son of Jehohanan, Azariah, the son of Obed, Messiah, the son of Ada, and Elisaphat, son of Zichri. These men traveled secretly through Judah and summoned the Levites and clan leaders in all the towns to come to Jerusalem. They all gathered at the temple of God, where they made a solemn pact with Joash, the young king. Jehoiada said to them, "Here is the king's son. The time has come for him to reign. The Lord has promised that a descendant of David will be our king. This is what you must do." There's that conviction. When you priests and Levites come on duty on the Sabbath, a third of you will serve as gatekeepers. Another third will go over to the royal palace, and the final third will be at the fountain gate. Everyone else should stay in the courtyards of the Lord's temple. Remember, only the priests and Levites on duty may enter the temple of the Lord, for they are set apart as holy. The rest of the people must obey the Lord's instructions and stay outside. You Levites, form a bodyguard around the king and keep your weapons in hand. Kill anyone who tries to enter the temple. Stay with the king wherever he goes. So the Levites and all the people of Judah did everything as Jehoiada the priest ordered. The commanders took charge of the men reporting for duty that Sabbath, as well as those who were going off duty. Jehoiada the priest did not let anyone go home after their shift ended. Then Jehoiada supplied the commanders with the spears and large and small shields that had once belonged to the King David and were stored in the temple of God. He stationed all the people around the king with their weapons ready. They formed a line from the south side of the temple around to the north side and all around the altar. Then Jehoiada and his sons brought out Joash the king's son, placed the crown on his head, and presented him with a copy of God's laws. They anointed him and proclaimed him king, and everyone shouted, "Long live the king." When Athaliah heard all the noise made by the palace guards and the people, she hurried to the Lord's temple to see what was happening. When she arrived, she saw the newly crowned king standing in his place of authority by the pillar, as was the custom at times of coronation. The commanders and trumpeters were surrounding him, and people from all over the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. When Athaliah saw all this, she tore her clothes in despair and shouted, "Treason! Treason!" Then Jehoiada, the priest, ordered the commanders who were in charge of the troops, "Take her to the soldiers in front of the temple, and kill anyone who tries to rescue her." For the priest had said, "She must not be killed in the temple of the Lord." So they seized her and led her out to the gate where horses entered the palace grounds, and she was killed there. 2 Chronicles 23:12. When Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and shouting of praise to the king, she hurried to the Lord's temple to see what was happening. When she arrived, she saw the newly crowned king standing in his place of authority by the temple at the temple entrance. The commanders and trumpeters were surrounding him, and the people from all over the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Singers with musical instruments were leading the people in a great celebration. When Athaliah saw all this, she tore her clothes in despair and shouted, "Treason! Treason!" Then Jehoiada the priest ordered the commanders who were in charge of the troops, "Take her to the soldiers in front of the temple and kill anyone who tries to rescue her." For the priest had said, "She must not be killed in the temple of the Lord." So they seized her and led her out to the entrance of the horse gate on the palace grounds, and they killed her there. Okay, let's pick it back up. 2 Kings 11:17. Then Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people that they would be the Lord's people. He also made a covenant between the king and the people, and all the people of the land went over to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They demolished the altars and smashed the idols to pieces, and they killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Jehoiada the priest stationed guards at the temple of the Lord. Then the commanders, the Karaite mercenaries, the palace guards, and all the people of the land escorted the king from the temple of the Lord. They went through the gate of the guards and into the palace, and the king took his seat on the royal throne. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was peaceful, because Athaliah had been killed at the king's palace. Joash was 7 years old when he became king. That's pretty young. 2 Chronicles 23:16. Then Jehoiada made a covenant between himself and the king and the people that they would be the Lord's people. And all the people went over to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They demolished the altars and smashed the idols, and they killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Jehoiada now put the priests and Levites in charge of the temple of the Lord, following all the directions given by David. He also commanded them to present burnt offerings to the Lord as prescribed by the law of Moses, and to sing and rejoice as David had instructed. He also stationed gatekeepers at the gates of the Lord's temple to keep out those who for any reason were ceremonially unclean. Then the commanders, nobles, rulers, and all the people of the land escorted the king from the temple of the Lord. They went through the upper gate and into the palace, and they seated the king on the royal throne. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was peaceful, because Athaliah had been killed. 2 Kings 12. Joash began to rule over Judah in the 7th year of King Jehu's reign in Israel. He reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother was Zibiah from Beersheba. All his life, underline this verse too, all his life Joash did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, because Jehoiada the priest instructed him. That is powerful. Joash did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight because Jehoiada the priest instructed him. That's discipleship. Let me help you know how to live holy for your whole life. This is more than Sunday school. This is him walking the journey with him so that you can live a holy life, do what's pleasing to the Lord. That's an incredible statement. What an incredible epitaph for a person to have. He did what was right in the Lord's sight, How about, what an epitaph, not just for Joash, but for Jehoiada, the priest. Joash did what was right because this man, the priest, instructed him. Yet even so, he did not destroy the pagan shrines, and the people still offered sacrifices and burnt incense there. It's because sin gets rooted in so deep, where sometimes it gets so entrenched, so rooted in, that it's hard to get it rooted out. One day, King Joash said to the priests, collect all the money brought as a sacred offering to the Lord's temple, whether it is a regular assessment, a payment of vows, or a voluntary gift. Let the priests take some of that money to pay for whatever repairs are needed at the temple. But by the 23rd year of Joash's reign, the priests still had not repaired the temple. So King Joash called for Jehoiada and the other priests and asked them, why haven't you repaired the temple? They'd been taking the money. Where'd it go? But the temple wasn't repaired. Don't use any more money for your own needs. From now on, it must all be spent on temple repairs. So the priests agreed not to accept any more money from the people, and they also agreed to let others take responsibility for repairing the temple. And so Joash took the responsibility from them and gave it to somebody else because they were unfaithful. And then Jehoiada the priest bored a hole in the lid of a large chest and set it on the right-hand side of the altar at the entrance of the temple of the Lord. The priest guarding the entrance put all of the people's contributions into the chest. Whenever the chest became full, the court secretary and the high priest counted the money that had been brought to the Lord's temple and put it into bags. Look at that accountability. Two people always counting money, not related. That's always was my standard of operation with church funds. Always two people counting the money, and those people never related. And it says, then they gave the money to the construction supervisors who used it to pay the people working on the Lord's temple, the carpenters, the builders, the masons, and the stonecutters. They also used the money to buy the timber and the finished stone needed for repairing the Lord's temple, and they paid any other expenses related to the temple's restoration. The money brought to the temple was not used for making silver bowls, lamp snuffers, basins, trumpets, or other articles of gold or silver for the temple of the Lord. It was paid to the workmen who used it for the temple repairs. No accounting of this money was required from the construction supervisors because they were honest and trustworthy men. However, the money that was contributed for guilt offerings and sin offerings was not brought into the Lord's temple. It was given to the priests for their own use. 2 Chronicles 24. Joash was 7 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother was Zibiah from Beersheba. Joash did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight throughout the lifetime of Jehoiada the priest. Jehoiada chose 2 wives for Joash, and he had sons and daughters. At one point, Joash decided to repair and restore the temple of the Lord, and he summoned the priests and Levites and gave them these instructions. Go to all the towns of Judah and collect the required annual offerings so that they can repair the temple of your God. Do not delay. But the Levites did not act immediately. So the king called for Jehoiada the high priest and asked him, why haven't you demanded that the Levites go out and collect the temple taxes from the towns of Judah and from Jerusalem? Moses, the servant of the Lord, levied this tax on the community of Israel in order to maintain the tabernacle of the covenant. Over the years, the followers of wicked Athaliah had broken into the temple of God, and they had used all the dedicated things from the temple of the Lord to worship the images of Baal. So now the king ordered a chest to be made and set outside the gate leading to the temple of the Lord. Then a proclamation was sent throughout Judah and Jerusalem, telling the people to bring to the Lord the tax that Moses, the servant of God, had required of the Israelites in the wilderness. This pleased all the leaders and the people, and they gladly brought their money and filled the chest with it. Whenever the chest became full, the Levites would carry it to the king's officials. Then the court secretary and an officer of the high priest would come and empty the chest and take it back to the temple again. This went on day after day, and a large amount of money was collected. The king and Jehoiada gave the money to the construction supervisors who hired masons and carpenters to restore the temple of the Lord. They also hired metal workers who made articles of iron and bronze for the Lord's temple. The men in charge of the renovation worked hard and made steady progress. They restored the temple of God according to its original design and strengthened it. When all the repairs were finished, they brought the remaining money to the king and Jehoiada. It was used to make various articles for the temple of the Lord, articles for worship services and for burnt offerings, including ladles and other articles made of gold and silver. And the burnt offerings were sacrificed continually in the temple of the Lord during the lifetime of Jehoiada the priest. Jehoiada lived to a very old age, finally dying at 130. He was buried among the kings in the city of David because he had done so much good in Israel for God and his temple. It's such a great, man, what a great story. And it's a man who's dedicated to God, dedicated to the worship of God. I mean, that's a heart for worship of the Lord. That's a heart for honoring God. So valuable. 2 Chronicles 24:17. But after Jehoiada's death, the leaders of Judah came and bowed before King Joash and persuaded him to listen to their advice. They decided to abandon the temple of the Lord, the God of their ancestors, and they worshipped Asherah poles and idols instead. Because of this sin, divine anger fell on Judah and Jerusalem. Yet the Lord sent prophets to bring them back to him. The prophets warned them, but still the people would not listen. Then the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest, and he stood before the people and said, "This is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands and keep yourself from prospering? You have abandoned the Lord, and now he has abandoned you." Then the leaders plotted to kill Zechariah, and King Joash ordered that they stone him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. That was how King Joash repaid Jehoiada for his loyalty, by killing his son. Zechariah's last words as he died were, "May the Lord see what they are doing and avenge my death." The Lord raised up Zechariah. And Zechariah was his part in the Bible is super short. But what an important part of the Bible that he has. And God raises him up as a standard to go in and call the people to repentance and call the people back to God. And because what the people wanted was to have people that would, leaders who would scratch their itching ears, is what the New Testament speaks about. We live in a day when, rather than hearing truth, people would rather have pastors or priests or whoever they will bring around them just to scratch their itching ears, to say what they want to hear. And when they don't say what they want to hear, they dismiss them, they discard them, they fire them, or they murder them. They murder them with their tongue, they murder them with their actions, they murder their reputation. We live in a day like that. And so, something to consider where we're at. Where are you at? Do you listen to truth? Or do you want to kill the messenger? Something that's important to really consider. 2 Kings 10:32. About that time the Lord began to cut down the size of Israel's territory. That's no small sentence. Underline that. God sees what's happening. He sees what's happening in Judah. He sees what's happening in Israel. What does it mean that he began to cut down Israel's territory? God begins to allow Israel to fade. He begins to allow the other nations around them to begin to gobble them up. King Hazael conquered several sections of the country east of the Jordan River, including all of Gilead, Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh. He conquered the area from the town of Aurora by the Arnon Gorge to as far north as Gilead and Bashan. And the rest of the events in Jehu's reign, everything he did and all his achievements, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jehu died, he was buried in Samaria, and then his son Jehoahaz became the next king. In all, Jehu reigned over Israel from Samaria for 28 years. All right, well, we're watching it. The way the king goes is the way the people go. God's calling us, God's calling leaders to serve him, to be faithful, call out truth, whether the people like it or not. And then the rest is up to the people as to decide whether or not they're going to serve the Lord. Like, Joshua at one point says, I don't know about all of you, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. We will be faithful to God, despite what the culture says is acceptable. And we've got these sins in our culture. We've got a lot of sins in our culture that right now people are saying, you know what, let's not touch it. It's all right. Let's not tell people that homosexuality is a sin. Let's just, you know what, they feel like it's right. It's okay for them. They were born that way. Well, we were all born into sin. We could all use that excuse. A heterosexual, I was just born this way. The urge to, have sex with lots of people. The thief, I was born this way. I just can't help it. Can't help it. I see things I want, that's why I take it. The murderer, I was born this way. I was just born angry. And so, I can't help my rage. So I feel justified in killing people. Just because we feel justified doesn't mean that it's right. We have these pet sins in our society. And we can go right down the list. You might not like what I'm saying. You can consider me as they considered Zechariah. I'd like to kill that messenger or ignore him. But don't do it. Listen to what God has to say. God's explicit in what he says in his word of what is sin and what to stop. Tear down the Asherah poles. Tear it down. Drunkenness. I go right down through the list. And what we've done in our society today is we've said, oh, you're just being legalistic. Well, guess what? Legalistic means that you're following the law. And you know what? And the law of God, it seems to me, seems to be a pretty important thing in God's day. They put it in Joash's hand the moment he became king, 7 years old. What does it say? It gives him the picture. There he is on the throne with the law of God in his hands. Now, we know the letter of the law is not the thing that saves us. We know that Jesus died on the cross to save us. But the law of God, in fact, this is an interesting thing. The law of God, we're talking about the moral law, not the Jewish law of temple sacrifice and all those things, because now it wasn't taken away, because it was actually fulfilled through Jesus with the death on the cross. Those laws of ritual and worship, and because they needed to do that to be right with God, Jesus is the one that fulfilled those things. But you know what? We've been called to follow the moral law, the moral compass that God has. The death of Jesus didn't eliminate the righteousness of God, the holiness of God. And he calls his people to be holy. Be holy as I'm holy, it says. And so God calls us to do that, to live as righteous people, to deal with sin. Hebrews says, let us therefore cast off every sin, everything that hinders, and the sin that so easily entangles us. Let us run with perseverance the race that's been marked out for. Let's get rid of sin. So don't be like these people who live. You know what? I'm doing this, but I'm serving God. I'm doing this, but you know what? I'm holding onto this sin, kind of hoping it balances out. No, let's not do that. God's called us to more. God's called us to more. He's called us to bring victory, not just forgiveness of sin, but victory over sin. It's time to get it rooted up, to get it rooted out, and to live faithfully for God. All right, well, I hope that you've enjoyed today's reading. God bless you. We'll come back tomorrow. I'm here in Canada with the Canadian district of the Wesleyan Church, and here to have meetings with other pastors, with the leaders here, in talking about the future, and just believing God for great things. And so, God bless you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Hope you have a really great day.